We have two microphones.
Yes, me too.
This is
So Kenny has one. This is hot and live.
Who has one?
Sherry.
Oh, okay. To pass around.
Yes, exactly. How you doing? Well, thanks. How are you? Bill.
So we have.
Students do. What do you want to do? So I can spend it long or short. Okay. Yep. Great. Wow, I like a cover dog. I have no idea. Yeah, great.
And there's a lot of people.
Thank you. We also file this lecture to advance your slides. And then typically, if I have an X on the board, so and right in this vicinity, that would be perfect. Yes, exactly. We're just in this vicinity. So, this is live. And
Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started. So if you could find a nice place to stand. Standing room only today. So we're very excited to have as our guest speaker today Superintendent Hite. And you must know, Superintendent, that I always call you President Hite for some reason. You like that? Maybe you're destined to be a president of something someday. I met with Superintendent Hite, I don't know, maybe 6-8 weeks ago, and we had a conversation, and it was a good conversation, and he asked if he could come and have a conversation with all of us. And so since we started a new Dean's Lecture Series, he's our second speaker in this series, and by the attendance, you can see that we're all very excited for you to be here. So we have people in the room, and we have people online as well, and the representation are our faculty, our staff, and students. So I'm just going to say a short bio. I'll read you a short bio, and then I will turn it over to Superintendent Hite. With a focus on equity, innovation, and equality, Dr. William R. Hite serves as Superintendent of the School District of Philadelphia, the largest public school system in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Since joining the school district in June 2012, Dr. Hite has worked to create a system of great schools in every neighborhood. Under his leadership, the school district has opened new innovative high schools, expanded successful school models, launched in-district turnarounds, and redesigned schools in partnership with communities. His overall focus remains on strengthening all elementary and secondary school offerings. So he's done quite a bit. And so we're anxious to hear from him and have a conversation with him. So Superintendent Hite.
Thank you. Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Good morning. And thanks for the introduction. And these days, no one wants to be called president. And so, so Bill is fine. And so thank you, and thanks for being here. I want to spend a little time this morning talking about what we are trying to do here in Philadelphia. I've been here now since someone asked me yesterday this question, and I paused because it seems so much longer. But I've been here since October 2012, and this is now my seventh year here. And thinking about what we had to navigate to get to this point and where we are today is pretty extraordinary in terms of many of the challenges that we've had to overcome. and acknowledging that we have a long ways to go with respect to what we're trying to do here in the school district. So I want to talk to you a little bit this morning about what it is we are attempting to do. And this is a deck that I've shared regularly in City Council, in Harrisburg, with our leaders, with philanthropy, and with educators and students like yourselves. And so one of the things I think is important is individuals to understand that, one, the School District of Philadelphia is making progress, and we're inviting people to be a part of that progress as we work forward. So this is an overview, well, as you can see, I'm in your university, so it's an overview for you. And I'll begin with some national recognition that we received at the beginning of this year. The reason this recognition is so important is because there were 17 schools in Pennsylvania, and there were 2 from Philadelphia, 2 public schools from Philadelphia. Both of those public schools named National Blue Ribbon schools this past year were School District of Philadelphia schools. So we were really excited about that. And so we always like to lead with good news about the work that our teachers are doing, our families are doing, our administrators. And these 2 schools were Greenfield, Albert Greenfield, and William Meredith. And these were the 2 schools that were Blue Ribbon schools. Essentially, what we think about in the School District of Philadelphia is what I think about all the time. And my experiences and have actually informed my beliefs about what our children are capable of. And experiencing education at every level, as a teacher, as a principal, as an assistant principal, as a coach, and as a district leader, children always reach their potential, whatever that potential may be, when given access to opportunity. And if in fact those opportunities are available to some but not others, then we have problems with what we like to call in education equity. But one of the things that I want people here in Philadelphia to understand is that our students are smarter than they know and than we know. And if in fact we limit their access to opportunity, we limit their potential, then they will never reach the powerful types of levels that they may be able to reach academically, socially, and in many cases, psychologically, that they can. And so one of the things that I've always talked about is that the future of the students here in Philadelphia, regardless of where they reside in the city, is limitless. And it's limitless if in fact we do our part in making sure they have what they need. And so this is about equity, and some of what I'm going to talk about this morning is how we approaching this concept of equity, because that means a lot of things, and it's used, and quite frankly, overused a lot, particularly in education circles, and people get it confused. People get it confused with like all being the same and equal. And as we think about this, it's not so much from equal resources, but if in fact we're talking about educational equity, is what do we have to invest to ensure that all students reach a certain outcome? And that's a very different premise and approach, which means some students actually must get more in order because of the circumstances that they're associated with. So one of the things that, and so I'm going to use this as an example, and we operationalize equity by having a good school close, ensuring that we have great schools close to where children live. This is a map of Philadelphia. You can see on this map. Can I move off of this X?
You can.
Yeah. So you see on this map, we have areas of the city, and this is the city of Philadelphia. And if you look at our tiers of schools, and our tiers of schools just run in quartiles, and so red, orange, green, and blue. And naturally, we want green and blue schools and fewer red and orange schools. And then these schools are actually, these colors are actually determined from an index that we've created. It's called our School Progress Report. And on the School Progress Report, it looks at achievement but the highest measure is growth. And so it's progress, achievement, it is climate in schools and cultures, and for high schools, it's college and career readiness. And so it's things like attendance. And so some examples here are at a red school, you may have 2 out of every 10 children reading on grade level. Or you may have only 50% of the students attending school 95% of the time. You may have on a survey students who say they don't feel safe at the school, or parents who say, I don't feel welcome. You may have students who are interested in programs that are not available at their school, as compared to a blue school where 9 out of 10 children are reading on grade level. Almost all the children attend 95% of the time, that everyone wants to be at that school. And you can see there are pockets of the city where we have some areas that have high quality. And so some areas have high performing schools. Oh, by the way, these are district and charter schools. These aren't just School District of Philadelphia schools. These are district and charter schools. And when we look at those schools across the framework, you can see there's some in the Northeast, there's some in Center City, and then you can see other areas of the city where, if in fact you have access to choice, or if the family has the means to make a choice, they also have high performing options in areas in and around the city. And so one of the things that's interesting with this map is that you could overlay almost any data point on here and it'll come out the same. And you could overlay a crime map on this. You can overlay a poverty map. You can overlay a map about access to quality nutrition or behavioral health. And all of these, if you did a heat map on this, it would fall the same, which means there's certain neighborhoods that are dealing with circumstances of poverty, trauma, and don't have quality educational options. And so our goal is for more blue and green schools and fewer red and yellow schools. And it doesn't mean closing low performing schools. What it means is transforming, converting those schools to higher levels. And we've been making some progress here, by the way, over the past several years. And you can see we now have almost 7,600 fewer students in schools that were intervened over a 3-year period. About 4,000, almost 5,000 more students in the 2 highest tiers. And we still have a lot of work to do here, but our goal is to have fewer and fewer students in the lowest performing schools and more students in schools that are higher performing. And essentially on this map, it is about converting red and orange to green and blue. And that is our work. And so that's what we are attempting to do across the school district. So how do we think about that? We have a strategic plan, and it is called our strategic plan. And we were looking for a name, and it was a strategy, but it's how do you actually make those strategies actionable? And so we started with, we're just going to call it our action plan. And this is the 3rd version. And so we didn't get fancy with the name, so it's Action Plan version 3.0. And we're about to redo this, but this is about how do we make our schools great and who do we ask to join us in that process. And so it has 4 goals. And the reason it has 4 goals is because in education, you can get confused quickly with going after the silver bullet of the day. And people will say, well, what did they do to improve? And someone would say, well, they put children in uniforms. And then the next thing you know, we have everybody who have a uniform strategy as their school improvement strategy. I'm just using this as an example. This goes back to like the 2000s when people say, well, put students in uniforms. And that became a strategy. Or give all children a computer. And that became another strategy. And then so you have hundreds of these things that people talk about with respect to how do you improve education. And so one of the things that we wanted to do was first say, what does the evidence suggest that if we do these things well, we will actually create better schools. So one is that first and foremost, we want all children graduating with the ability to pursue their interests, whether it's college or career, understanding that regardless of what that is, they're going to need some sort of post-secondary experience to do that. And so, first of all, 100% of the students graduate. We're using 100% on this intentionally, knowing that we're a long ways from that place right now, but the 100% is actually representative of all students, every single one of them. And it is why we're very intentional around that. But it also focuses the efforts of everyone who works in the district. So, but in order to graduate students, we have to ensure that we have children who can read. Because if you start off with fewer children learning to read, then it gets awfully hard to get to that 100% graduation. And so then we said 100% of all 8-year-olds will read on grade level. And one of the things we focused on here is that whole early numeracy effort is from 0 to 8 years old. Understanding that there are a lot of things that we could do to help families and young parents early on so that their children are on a pathway to reading by the time they're 8 years old. We also know that for those who don't learn to read, then all of the investments, it's a lot more expensive to remediate those children later in life or later in grades, either in middle school or in high school. We know that in order to do this, we need the best people standing in front of students and the best people leading schools. And then, given the time that we did this strategy, we also needed the funding to do 1, 2, and 3, and making sure we had the sufficient means to do these things. So this was our action plan. I was trying to get it to 2 goals, and we could not get it to 2 goals. But the fewer here, the better. Now, there are hundreds of strategies behind each of these goals, and there are many actions that are associated with this that actually talk about what people do. And I'll use some examples here. So, and then we have, one of the things I wanted to show was some progress that we're making towards these goals. And so this, several years ago, I think when Mayor Nutter started as mayor, that graduation rate was 50%. And then still not at the 80%, but we have a 5-year target of 80%. And we are 13 percentage points away from that. But one of the things that's important here, the reason we use the 5 years to measure this progress is because our budget, we have a 5-year financial plan. And we want to show people what those investments are actually yielding in terms of progress. And then there are some examples of things that we do around making sure that children graduate on time. So we really focused on 9th grade. And if in fact children get to and through 9th grade, evidence supports that they will be more likely to graduate on. It's the #1 indicator. In fact, if they are in the right classes, if they pass those classes, and if they attend school regularly. And so we created 9th grade academies in all of our high schools to ensure that children have the supports they need in order to get to and through 9th grade successfully. Focused on literacy as well. When I got here, we had an early literacy rate of about 22%. We're now at 35%. You can see we're trying to get to 2 out of 3 children reading on grade level over the 5-year period of our plan. We've done a lot to actually focus our efforts around literacy. And there's a Read by 4 campaign across the city of Philadelphia that's also a part of this work. And you've seen we've done classroom innovations, retraining teachers, doing and training people on how to give reading assessments so that they understand what children need in order to learn to read. And you can see here that we have categories of students. And so naturally, we're trying to get students to proficient and advanced, but they don't get to proficient and advanced if they don't move off of below basic. And as you can see, over that same 3-year period that I talked about before, we have not only are we seeing more children proficient or advanced, but we're moving thousands of children from the lowest level. And you have to get them I always talk about making sure children crawl before they walk. I mean, and this is really children who are coming to schools that have not had pre-K or they've been exposed to trauma, getting those children from below basic and then moving and continuing that movement forward is really important. And we've seen the same type of movement in our subgroups, looking at our Black and Hispanic or Latino youth. And then we have the great teachers and principals, but we have other measures to talk about progress. And then we now have investments that we're making in schools and making sure that we have the resources that we need. And we went from having a $1.5 billion deficit, 2012, 1.5 billion. And when you have over 20,000 employees and you don't know if you can make payroll, that's a problem. And when you spend almost, you're spending $700 million a year on debt payments, that's a problem. And so part of what we had to do is also stabilize the district so that we can begin focusing on these new things. And so we had to make some hard decisions early in order to make investments now. And so you can see now that after 3 hard years, we've now had 4 straight years of balanced budgets. We have now, we're in the midst of a $526 million investment campaign back into schools. And we've had, for the first time in a decade, a credit upgrade from the bond rating agencies. And we're about to get the second one. And so part of this is looking systemically at a lot of things that must happen in order to do work on schools. And so I think I'll stop there and just, because this other stuff goes into environmental and ensuring schools are safe and all those things. And I'll leave the slides up just in case we get questions around this, because then I can talk about this work that we have done with a lot of the environmental issues in the school district. But with that, I want to go back to, or forward to, this notion of the limitless potential of the youth that we serve. And I talk with children all the time. In fact, I have what's called a superintendent's advisory. It's a student advisory for the superintendent. And students tell me all the time that in math class, if they're an 11th grader and they're algebra 2 or a geometry class or a calculus class, then they want to be treated like an 11th grader in an algebra class, on algebra 2, or in a calculus class. They don't want to be treated like they're in the 3rd grade in an algebra class. And so what does that mean? It means that they know when they're not being challenged. They know when people are not asking them to expand their thinking. They also know when individuals could care less if, in fact, they actually learn the material or not. And so one of the things that we actually have been focused on is, or are, the mindsets of individuals who are working with youth. And we're trying to literally move from having fixed mindsets that are based on a set of circumstances that are outside of many of their children's control, like where they live, or who they are, or who their parents are, to what they can do if, in fact, we get them to put the sufficient effort into something that is relevant to them and challenging for them. And we are asking them to problem solve. We're asking them to think critically. We're asking them to work in groups now. And quite frankly, they have actually done a much better job at it than many of us, the adults who are working with them. And so part of this is also, once again, talking about the limitless potential of our students and ensuring that irrespective of where they are in the city, they have access to these opportunities. And so with that, I'll close out my portion of this presentation and then ask if there are questions. And I tend to learn from conversations like these. And really interested in your comments or questions or suggestions. So with that, we'll open the floor for questions.
We have a microphone, so if you have a question, make sure you have the microphone.
Does the person asking the question have to stand on the X?
That's just reserved for you.
That's
Thank you for that excellent introduction.
Sure.
It was really thrilling to see that map and how systematic you are being in moving schools from the intervene level to those higher levels. I can't remember what blue is, model or?
Model.
Model,
Yes.
okay, good, so I'm gonna remember that. I was wondering if you could unpack that goal about having great principals, because one of the problems is, high turnover among principals, particularly in high poverty areas. I think that the average turnover for leadership for principals is about 2 years in terms of how long they stay in a school. And sometimes you see this shuffling of principals from one school to another in a large district. How are you measuring great principals and their longevity when you find a good principal? And just if you could unpack that goal a little bit.
Sure, I'll be glad to. And I think you're going back to the goal of great teachers and great principals. And so one, you're absolutely right. So the first year I started here, we had to hire 58 principals. And part of that was because we were closing schools and then those schools were going to different schools. And I just declared all of those positions vacant, so to see who we had. And one thing that was unsettling about that process is that I think after I hired the 8th principal, we were just settling with individuals who had the credentials. And I had 50 more to go. And so we don't have to hire that many now. In fact, we've actually done a lot of work to address the retention of principals. And in fact, if I were to rate the most important factor around attracting and retaining great teachers, it's the leadership of the school. And quite frankly, the schools that have moved, even in the high poverty areas, with the similar circumstances that those who have not moved, the distinction has been the leadership. And the reason for that is as follows. I have 10,000 teachers and 244 principals. And so my work is much more directed and responsive and effective to those 244 individuals. But part of what we're trying to do now, though, is train individuals around general components of leadership. And there are leadership components like establishing a vision for your school, creating conditions for children for trust, using data, understanding instruction and how to create the conditions for good instruction. All of these things are inside of a leadership framework. And we started training individuals on what we needed them to know in order to do those things. And then we started putting those individuals in schools where we wanted them to work, to train. And then that created a group of individuals that we could then choose from. And so we've actually done a lot better than the national average around principals and retaining principals that we've now hired. And so over the last several years, we've had about 24 vacancies, but half of those are individuals who are already at schools that are going to other schools where people resigned or retired or moved on to another job. And we have now candidates for all of these positions so that I'm not in a situation now where I'm settling. We still have some challenges at some of our comprehensive high schools because they're tough. And they're tough because we've created a set of structures. This goes, I know you asked a different question, but I'm gonna go back to the equity question. Because we've created a structure that allows people to select out of certain schools. And that's okay, because that's okay. But the problem is when you do that, then all of the children who can't gain access to those choices, then must default to the neighborhood or the comprehensive schools. And so what happens? A third of those populations are students with disabilities. A third of those populations are children who are learning English. A third of those populations are children who are 2 or more years behind grade level. And that large concentration of those circumstances then create a different set of challenges for those individuals. So that's what our comprehensive high schools are dealing with. But to answer your question, we train individuals now, and then we hold them accountable. But we couldn't hold them accountable before we trained them, because I think of accountability reciprocally, and that means that I need to prepare you in order to hold you accountable for what I'm asking you to be accountable for. So we do 4 meetings a year with principals, and we do a summer institute with principals. They used to be 10 months. We took them to 12 months, and we use the summer now to help develop them as well.
So building off that a little bit, can you talk, and going back to the map that you had, can you talk a little bit about whether or not that map influences decisions related to the community schools movement, right? So which schools would become community schools? And then the second part of that gets back to the leadership piece. What kind of work is being done to prepare principals for community school leadership, which does look a little bit different than leadership in traditional schools?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And the short answer is no. In the rollout of community schools, the map didn't determine where the community schools went. And there's a reason for that. Because the rollout of community schools was more political than it was educational. And so people were trying to get community schools into each councilmatic district because those individuals had to vote on the funds in order to support community schools. The other thing is what happens when things that support education are not run by the entity that does education. And so you have a whole set of different reasons for things to be, for placements and decisions than what we should have. Going forward, however, the map is determining where community schools are going, because we've done a much better job now of aligning city-based resources and assets to address this issue, because we had to start talking to each other and talking about data. And so data in some of these schools where there are high absenteeism rates, in some cases a lot of discipline, a lot of crime. We also found out that there are high instances of curfew violations. We wouldn't have curfew violation information. The city wouldn't have our attendance information. And it was really important for us to start sharing that information and said, wait a second, this is the exact same neighborhood, and we should be doing more to help solve each other's problems. And so moving forward, we are actually doing that. To your question about principals, yes, we're also doing a lot of work with principals to prepare them to do the work in their communities and more in their community schools. But community schools work when they're responsive to whatever the needs of those communities are, particularly as it relates to serving those children. And so the community schools project was rolled out with giving people a survey of what they wanted. And what people want is generally different than them having an understanding of the need. So all of the children are exposed to trauma. People are asking for more field trips. Then it's great, and people will feel good about the field trips, but that won't help with the trauma. And so we're now looking at data to inform those decisions, and it's a much tighter alignment. There's much tighter alignment now than before. Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My question has to do with your goal number 4 for funding.
Mm-hmm.
An old statistic, probably before you became superintendent, was 50% of the students that live in poverty in the state of Pennsylvania reside in Philadelphia, although the funding is not proportional for those students in schools. I'd like an update on that if you have one.
Yeah, funding is still not proportional. So, and in Pennsylvania, funding is not proportional. So it's the number one, it was deemed the number one state for inequity between the highest districts with means and the lowest. And and that differentiation made Pennsylvania the number one state in terms of inequity in how they fund. And so we still have the lion's share of children who live in circumstances of poverty. 97% of our children are in poverty. We actually treat it as 100%. So everybody gets breakfast, everyone gets lunch, and we even have some schools where we send meals home. And it's really important. And it's what a lot of people don't understand sometimes when we started the school year and it was hot, people said you shouldn't have school. And we have thousands of children who only eat at school. And then when people say, well, there's a prediction of snow, so you should close because of the prediction, well, we have thousands of children who don't have heat at home, right? So we also have to think through those decisions. But we still represent most of the children who live in circumstances of poverty, although there are some cities that are catching up with us.
Well, what's being done what can we be doing to get more funding and make it more equitable?
Yeah, so the state created a what they call they have now they have the basic ed funding, and they did the basic ed formula that only applies to new money, and that money is now run through a formula that is based on concentrations of poverty. And so it means that, quite frankly, Philadelphia gets 20% of any new monies that are run through that formula. So we advocate now for more monies to run through the formula, right? So that's number one. The second largest problem is a whole harmless provision in law that says districts that have lost students maintain their level of funding from the state. And so just think about that for a second. So if you've lost 10,000 students, you actually can spend 25, in some cases 30% more on the students who remain in your district. That provision is still in place. For years, Pennsylvania has used a block grant. We have funded on a number of students who were enrolled in our school district in 1983. And everyone else is too. So if you gain students or lost students, then you lost students, you get more money. If you gain students, you get less money. And in Philadelphia, because of the onset of charters, we had a lot of students moving from the Catholic schools into many of their charter schools. So therefore, we gained students and therefore spent less per student based on the funding formula. And so that's the other problem. And the third thing is to address the funding for children with disabilities, particularly those children who go to charter schools. And it is a difference in how those young people are funded, and that funding is based on what the average different districts spend on a child with a disability. But understand, if we are educating all of the children who need ambulatory services or have significant disabilities, and they're only educating children who need speech once a week, then I'm not so sure they should be getting the full amount that we get, that we spend on all of the other children. And so that's also in law, and that's something that they tried to fix a couple of years ago, but it fell apart. So those are the three things. You're welcome.
So I'm over here. Related to some of the issues you've talked about is infrastructure. And something that I know some of us may not think about as much here, but I have a feeling is weighing on your mind is, how do we replace the aging infrastructure and the buildings that need things like addressing lead paint, as you just showed up there. Yeah. But I'm wondering, as you think about what you're going to do, I think there's over 200 buildings or something you have to deal with, how you're thinking about creating new buildings that can help address some of those goals you're talking about. So, if you're building communities, if you know you're going to have community schools, making sure that you have entrances that are available to people from the community that might not cause them to intermingle with the students, that kind of thing. So I'd be curious to hear what kind of thinking is going on about that.
Yeah, first we're prioritizing we're prioritizing all of the building types of issues around the safety for students, environmental issues with buildings, and then like we call them envelope issues, which are like heating, and if they have cooling systems, making sure those things. And so we're prioritizing those projects. I'm glad you brought that up because we have about 250 buildings. And in fact, with all of the buildings, including non-schools, it's about 300. But we have about 250 buildings where teachers and students are in. And the lion's share of those buildings, well, 70% of those buildings are over 100 years old. And they're beautifully built, and they're a mess. And so it means that we have to think about how do we, number one, renovate those that need to be renovated. And when I say renovation, we, in some cases, people are talking about, let's just buy air conditioners. Let's just buy window units. And a challenge with window units is many of the buildings have the 110 voltage when they need 220. And so 5 classrooms cut on an air condition, everything in the building goes out. And so then we have to rewire all of the buildings from the outside in. So what should be a $400,000 expenditure turns into almost a $40 million expenditure just because you have to rewire. But the things that we are prioritizing are the projects that are important. So around early literacy, we're modernizing the early literacy classrooms just so children have the learning environments. And we saw, I think I showed a picture of that earlier. This is some of the stuff that we're doing. And you can see on the top of this were paint stabilization projects. These are lead paint. This is dealing with lead paint. And lead is in any building in Philadelphia that was built before 1978. And we prioritize it by looking at areas that have peeling paint. And then we then further prioritize it that for the buildings that we do first are the buildings where little children are. And why? Because high school children don't eat lead paint. Little children will. And so then we prioritize our projects based on factors related to that. So we have 6 projects underway. At the end of the calendar, at the end of next year, we would have completed 44 of these projects. And you can see that right now that's a $15 million investment because we had to match the state funding on this. And then we do renovation. And so we do modernizing classrooms, we do major construction, we do the schools that are on that map that are red. They are schools that we talk about as system of grade schools, SGS schools. And so some of our investments are dealing with those locations, and other projects are dealing with places where we have enrollment expansions. And that's a lot in the Northeast. And then we have the other environmental projects, like the environmental projects with asbestos and mold that we then prioritize. But you can see that over an 8-week period in the summer, 24.3 million square feet of space that then we have to address. And that work is done around the clock in order to ensure that that's available and that buildings are in good conditions for students. Now, how we think about the capital projects moving forward, we look at building use, facility use, we look at the age and the condition of the building, we look at how many people are in the building, and then we make determinations of whether or not one new school is a better alternative than renovating the old project. And I'll use an example, the Meehan School in the Northeast. It's right underneath like Lincoln. And that school actually has a lot of environmental issues. It wasn't constructed. It's a fairly new school given our inventory, but it was a terrible layout. It was like these modules and children disappear. So they can run around the hall and disappear. And so for middle school, that could be a problem. As a middle school principal. And so we started looking at how do we renovate that school. And then after analyzing all of the costs, it's cheaper to tear it down and rebuild another one. We're not going to rebuild another middle school. We're going to rebuild a K-8 school and alleviate a lot of the enrollment expansion in that area. And so that's how we're thinking about it. Ben Franklin, that sits a block away from us at the school district, is a school that is relatively new, in good condition. We had to do some renovation there anyway, but it has about half of the enrollment that it was designed and built for. So we have Science Leadership Academy that's in another building that we lease, we pay for, $3 million, $4 million a year. And so we thought, instead of renewing the lease, is there an opportunity to look at a co-location in a facility that's in pretty good condition that we have to renovate anyway? And so we're pulling those two schools together. And we've done the same with Hill Friedman and Leeds. We've done the same with Beaver and SLA. So we're looking at ways to utilize facilities differently so that we are utilizing those facilities, renovating those facilities, and making sure that we are filling them to capacity based on the needs of the schools around. So it's a long prioritized way to deal with $4.5 billion in deferred maintenance costs. And that's only to repair the issues. And that wouldn't alleviate the air conditioning problem. That would just repair the things that need to be addressed. Yes.
Hi, Dr. Hite. Thank you so much for coming down here today. And first of all, I just want to applaud you because the school district has made some just incredible gains under your leadership in a short period of time, really. My question is related to stability in districts. So, like under, I think it's state law, like you have to review charter applications each year, and it seems like there's always some that get accepted and things like that. So at the same time, you have other schools that are under enrolled, things like that. So and obviously earlier in your tenure, you had to make some tough choices with I think you closed 24 schools or something like that. So how do you get that stability in terms of ensuring that we have the right schools that are open, or kids are going to schools that have an adequate number of people and things like that? How do you have that stable balance among your public and charter and other schools in your portfolio?
Yeah, through a lot of discourse, by the way. So, and it's, well, I think one of the things we're trying to manage now in Philadelphia are a lot of decisions that were made prior to my arrival. And I made some too. So I can't pass all the blame on. But I do think that, to your point, we have to have an annual process of looking at how schools are doing. And then we have to have a non-punitive way of making sure that we are having those conversations every year. What I mean by non-punitive is, before, if we would walk into a school looking at anything, I have to announce, because we closed 24 schools, but I recommended 39. And we've since that period, we've closed another 6. But so I would walk into someone's school and they were like, am I a candidate for closure? And it was so punitive that it actually blinded people from the work that we needed to do in order to actually focus on what students needed in their schools. And so when I went back to this slide, is part of what we call a system of grade schools. Is an annual process that we use to look across all schools, district and charter. And we use what we call I had those 4 tiers, and it was intervene, watch, reinforce, model. Those 4 tiers are applied across every single school in district and charter. And from those tiers, we make decisions about what schools will then be identified for intervention or supports. And when I first arrived, the school district didn't have the capacity to do some of those interventions itself. We had laid off 20% of the workforce, and we're trying not to have it touch schools. So all of our back office people were laid off. So we didn't have the wherewithal to do a lot of that work. So we contracted or chartered those decisions out to other providers. Now we have more capacity to do that work, so we're doing a lot of that work ourselves. As it relates to charters, though, many of those decisions are entangled with law. And you said there's a process to talk to them annually, but once they are approved, it's a 4-year cycle, and people are trying to move that to 5 years. So it's a they're approved for 4 years, and so whether they're good, bad, or not, unless they run out of money, they continue to operate. And we have recommended some to be closed. We've recommended others to be expanded. And it's the whole conversation, though, really should be back to the map. It's how do we ensure quality? How do we make sure all children have access to that? And how do we ensure that the funding is differentiated in a way to meet the needs of the children who are attending those schools? And because of the way funding is done here in Pennsylvania, it just becomes a conversation about district versus charter. And I would much rather it be quality and how do we know? And so we conflate, and rightfully so, because the funding is kind of funky. And so it's conflated, and it doesn't allow us to talk as much about quality. But we make annual decisions about who is targeted for interventions. And now we've evolved that process so that schools actually go through a self-study process and make the recommendations themselves to us. And we give them evidence-based types of decisions or strategies that they could use, but we're letting them make the decision. Did that answer your question? Yeah, okay.
Good morning, Superintendent.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming today. I have a question. You focused on professional development for your staff and accountability, which is phenomenal. I'm making an assumption that your professional development is probably limited based upon a plethora of factors: funding, time, resources. If you had a wish list for professional development for your staff and administration that you're unable to cover based upon funding, time, contractual obligations, etc., what would that wish list look like to you?
So I was talking about principals. I mean, but you say wish list, I'll think about teachers more. And if I could do anything, it would be creating the time for those individuals to converse with each other about their practice, and to converse with each other about student work, and converse with each other about planning. And I do think that those types of opportunities would provide teachers with more time to reflect on their practice, to actually get feedback on their practice, and be authentically honest with other colleagues about what they need in order to improve. With respect to principals, we actually can do most of what we need to do with those individuals. I mean, the challenge for them, the challenge that presents itself with principals is pulling those individuals out of buildings. But we actually have quite a few professional development pathways for principals. We have pathways for existing principals that a philanthropist has created. We have individuals who are looking to be principals or interested in being principals. We have a pathway for them. New principals are still a different pathway and support structure for those individuals. But more broadly, I think as a district, I think we should be thinking about leadership across the district. And what does that mean? And because there are leaders at every level, and how do we then build those leadership skills with individuals, whether the individual's a teacher, they lead a department, they're department head, they work in central office, a principal, or an assistant superintendent. What does leadership look like? And how do we build those strategies for individuals? And how do we build a system so that you can escalate through leadership without leaving the classroom? Because we're losing far too many people. And back to the earlier question about the principals, the other thing that we did was we stopped hiring them out of the principalship to do other jobs. And I actually, by design, raised their salaries over the salaries of everybody other than their supervisors, so that we took the incentive away for them to leave their building. Now, if they want to leave, they're leaving for a different reason. It's not for financial gain, because we've actually increased the salary so that what we're trying to do is create incentives for principals to remain and to be stable in schools. I saw a couple of hands. Yeah.
My question is about the school board. So
Sure.
how do you think all these changes, because now that you have a new school board that's not run by the state, or has this always been, these goals were always in mind, but now that you have a school board, all Philly, not, controlled by the Commonwealth, are those projects because of the new school board, or is it now just because just new principalship, new leadership?
Yeah, I mean, so we have 9 new members to our school board. They're all locally appointed, and now all about Philadelphia. The challenges with what people think about the new school board is that they can come in and make decisions that change the circumstances. None of these circumstances change. We still have the building issues. We still have the capacity issues. We still have facilities. We still have all of the problems that happen in schools. And so you don't want a governing body to change, nor is that the role of governance. Like, the role of governance is to ensure that what they do impacts student outcomes. Just think about that for a second. What people want them to do is to ensure that they impact things that happen with adults. But what they should do is impact those things that focus on student outcomes. So those are policy issues. Those are governance issues around how do we structure ourselves, what is measured, and how frequently do we measure those things to ensure. How do we then allocate monies to those areas to ensure that those things are done right? And how do they evaluate me to make sure that I'm meeting the goals that they've set forth for the district? These are actually my goals, and then they have goals as well. And their goals are larger things like equity, and ensuring that children have access, and ensuring that more children graduate. And those are things that then fall nicely into the 4 goals that I put up for the district. And each school has goals as it relates to those things.
Hi.
Hi.
I wanted to ask you a question about your second goal
Sure.
on early literacy skills. And since part of what we do here is train teachers that hopefully will go out into the Philadelphia School District, what are you expecting or want from your university partners to prepare their teachers to be ready to get all kids reading on grade level by 3rd grade?
Yeah, thank you for the question. In fact, one of the reasons that we trained all K through 3rd grade teachers, all of them, we did it in what we call a summer boot camp. And we did it because what we found was, while people had graduated, they didn't know how to teach reading, particularly at the early grades, nor did they know how to read an assessment and make determinations from that assessment. And so what we wanted to do was actually create behaviors for individuals around the 5 components of literacy, like how do you design your classroom? How do you read an Ames Web assessment? What do you do with the DRA? And then what happens with that? How do you think about phonics or phonemic awareness? What does a level library look like, and how is it implemented? Those are all things that we wanted individuals to do, know, and be able to do. The best thing that my recommendation would be is, I think part of our Read by 4 campaign is working with you and others to ensure that the things on which we're training our teachers are things that individuals are getting in their classrooms. And I think the other thing that I would recommend is that many individuals, I see a lot of students in here, and I don't know if they're student teachers or not, but hopefully their student teaching is in one of those classrooms where we've, number one, modernized the class, and then number two, using those approaches for reading and early literacy. And I think if in fact we get better at just communicating about those things we're trying to do, we would be much better prepared to do that. I was a reading teacher, but I taught reading in middle school after teaching in high school, and it was all of my reading was around like the philosophy of reading and theories related to that. And then I went into a classroom, and it was just like, wait a second, like what do I do first, right? And so what we were trying to do with the literacy boot camps was say, okay, this is what you do first, second, and third, so that individuals have like an approach to reading, and so that they feel more comfortable and not as overwhelmed as I did when I saw my first group of middle school. That it felt like it was in a classroom like this big too, by the way.
So, Superintendent Hite, you've alluded to it, but you haven't spoken explicitly about it. And one of the things that we know is that so many children born in poverty experience childhood trauma and experience significant challenges, and that impair their ability to learn because they're not healthy children coming into schools. So one of the things that we're committed to at Drexel is having the endorsement available for teachers. But I'm curious, and I'm going to piggyback on Lori's question, is what if you could have a wish list of things that you wished your new teachers came out knowing and understanding about social emotional wellness? What would that look like?
Yeah, I mean, we offer training now on trauma-informed care. We offer, and then I think the next iteration of that now that people can recognize trauma, now they have to be equipped with tools to address it. But I think that's a great place to start, so that we recognize, so we're able to distinguish trauma from behavior, and discipline. And it is a child who is in need versus a child that needs to be suspended or sent home into the same set of circumstances that are creating that feeling in the first place. And so we actually have done lots of work around trauma-informed care, conflict resolution, positive behavior intervention, restorative practices. And in fact, we now have more guidance counselors than we have school police officers. And we've been working hard to do that. And what have we found? We now have lower suspensions, lower expulsions, and lower incidents of violence. In fact, we have no persistently dangerous schools, and this is the fourth year in a row we haven't had it. That's because we have focused less on zero tolerance and more on recognizing children. But here's the other thing, and this is what I learned from the students in my student advisory. They want they don't want the perception, they actually want to feel that people care, right? So that people generally care about them. And I recall an incident when I was a principal of a high school, and a young lady came up to the French teacher, and the French teacher was a first-year teacher, and she's like, "Look, Miss So-and-so, I got braces." And she's just like, "Just go in class and sit down and get your stuff out." And it was a missed opportunity to say, "Wow, look at that." And so that the child felt like there was some sort of an advocate for them, or just someone who cared. And our children talk about that all the time. Now, that wasn't in Philadelphia, but we get stories about that all the time. And then I'll conclude with, I was at West Philadelphia when I think it was the first or second year I was here. Students asked me to come out and see restorative practices, and it was one of the first schools who was using it. And I was talking to the young people, and I said, "Well, what do you see as the benefits of this?" And they said, "Before this, I would get into a fight, be suspended, and then come back to school, see the same people, and start fighting again. But now, at least I have tools that I can actually go to, or I know how to ask for a conversation to actually talk about it, so I don't have to fight." So I said, "Well, that sounds amazing. What recommendation would you give to me about doing restorative practice?" And the young lady looked at me and she said, "Train the adults." and the reason people were saying that was because when we were talking about this at some of the high schools, people said, I actually don't want children to circle up because I don't care what they have to say. And the children feel that and know that and understand that. And when they do, like that's not the place they want to be. And so I think that this notion of establishing, we're not asking for people to be best friends, but we're asking for people to genuinely care about children. And so I think that is one thing that's extremely important. So with that, I think it's time for me to close. And before I close, can I just say this?
Yep.
So we have the highest graduation rates now that we've had in a decade. We have 4 years of a balanced budget. We now have art and music in every K-8 school, instrumental music, not just choir, instrumental music in every K-8 school. We have now started the last 2 years with 99% of the positions filled. I say all of that to say the opportunities for our children, once again, are limitless, and we need all of you to help us to continue with that progress, and we're just inviting all of you to be a part of that. So with that, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for that conversation and presentation. It was very informative, and you can tell by the questions we were very much interested in what you had to say about the school district. And you kind of ended how I wanted to end, and thank you, is how can we help you? We are here to be of service to you. And so perhaps this can be the start of an ongoing dialogue for how our faculty, staff, and students can support the school district, to ultimately support our children in Philadelphia. So thank you so much for coming here. We have about 15 minutes that we can have some informal conversations before we close, and then there's another meeting in here. But before we do that, I have a present for you.
Oh, present.
To show our appreciation for coming here and giving us some of your time today to talk to us about the school district. We have oh, I guess it broke.
Was that the present?
Yeah, a broken microphone. Yeah, thank you. So thank you so much. Let's give them a round of applause again.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I really do mean that when I say, how can we help you? So please feel free to reach out to me or to any one of us, and we will work with you to help the children. One thing that you're talking about at the end, what do teachers need day one in the classroom? I'm not sure we do that a good enough job in our classes. So maybe we can find ways to partner to help create our courses so that we can incorporate your boot camp into our courses. Yeah.
Right.
So thank you so much.
Thank you.